Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Joy Project. I'm Krista Avampado, your host. And every week I say we need joy now more than ever. And every week that statement gains more truth. Joy is medicine. I learned that going through breast cancer treatment during the pandemic. And it's one of the things that motivated me to make this podcast for you. One thing I love about this podcast is learning about hobbies and interests that I know nothing about. And today's episode is a perfect example of this. I met our guest through a storytelling Facebook group that we both belong to. He filled out the form to be a guest, and when asked what brings him joy, he said old time radio shows. I used to collect tapes of them in middle school and still listen to them to this day. When he said old time radio shows, I imagined old Abbott and Costello bits like Who's on First. Do tapes of those even exist anymore outside of dusty old archives? I don't even have a device that plays CDs, much less one that plays tapes. Though I'll admit that a good mixtape was one of the joys of my childhood. Radio shows like Abbott and Costello is exactly what he meant. And that classic isn't even the tip of the iceberg of the rich history he shared with me in our conversation. So settle in and take a trip back with me in time as we chat with the hilarious and entertaining comedian and old time radio show aficionado, Zachary Lennon-Simon. Zach, welcome to Joy Project.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Where are you joining us from today?
Joining you from my bedroom in Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
I'm also a New Yorker, so I love talking to other New Yorkers. I feel like in this city, we definitely need it after what we've been through the last couple of years. So I'm excited for more joy in more places.
Absolutely.
So, Zach, I want to start this conversation the way I start all the conversations on the podcast to ask you what brings you joy?
If we're talking New York, it's going to be pizza. Pizza's always brought me joy and maybe too many calories. Since I was a kid, old time radio shows have been the thing that has brought me the most joy, which is something that I am definitely too young to have gotten into. It was definitely something I got hooked on at an early age. Still listen to them to this day.
I don't know anything about old time radio shows. Tell me how you got into them. Do you remember the first time you heard one, and what was so special about these old time radio shows?
First of all, hardly anyone does know about old time radio shows, so you're not alone.
I don't have to feel badly. Excellent.
Yeah. I found myself then and to this day a little out of step with my generation. Like kids in my class would be like, "Oh, did you see the new Hey Arnold episode?" I was like, "No, I was listening to Abbott and Costello from 1947." Old time radio shows are basically just radio shows from like the 40s to the 60s. Everything was radio before they invented the TV. The first ones that I really got hooked on as a kid was my parents loved showing me black and white movies, like old timey screwball comedies or westerns and science fiction things and things like that. This was kind of like an extension of that because they had a show back in the 40s called Lux Radio Theater where they would do a condensed audio version of a movie that was playing. So you could hear this and be like, "Oh, this sounds pretty good. I can't wait to see the movie someday."
They were audio trailers for these movies.
Yeah, and it would be the full movie.
Huh.
Yeah, so you'd hear a whole like an hour-long movie and it was performed in front of like a live studio audience and with like a live orchestra. If it was a comedy, you heard lots of laughs and things, which was really fun. Found out later, listened to the radio version that my parents bought me on cassette, and then I'd go to the movie rental door, hole in the wall video on Court Street. I would go pick up, watch it, and some of the movies I'd notice like, oh, these things are very kind of different because they had to, make it obviously more audio oriented than visual. So I always remembered my favorite detective movie growing up was like Alan Ladd, Virginia Mayo, in this movie called This Gun for Hire, where Alan Ladd's like an assassin, and they have this great part that I loved, and I would imitate it throughout my whole house. Whenever like someone would be walking around, I'd come up to them, and there's like this henchman who's like whistling in the house, and Alan Ladd's like, it's bad luck to whistle in the house. And it's always like these very old timey voices that I got so hooked on those accents. And the guy's like, "Who are you?" He's like, "I just told you. Bad luck." He's like, and he dies. And I was like, that is such a cool line. It's so cool that he said that before killing that guy. I love it. And was so excited to like watch the movie and see my favorite line, and it wasn't in the movie. And I was so confused by that as a kid, where I was like, why would you not have the coolest line in the movie? But it was obviously because they went for more visual murder scene, which also very good.
Do you have favorite episodes, favorite radio shows?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My parents, who are so kind and encouraging for me to have such weird habits, they got me a subscription to every month they'd send you a CD with 2 episodes, like a sampler pack of different radio shows. And you get like a little binder that you could keep them in, and they have little factoids about each one. So I sampled a whole array, of radio shows from back then. For comedies, I really liked Abbott and Costello. They were so like funny and had like fantastic banter, and wordplay was a favorite of mine. And then I really got very into this show called Suspense, which was like an anthology type, kind of like the Twilight Zone, but for radio. It was so cool because they would every week have a Hollywood guest star, so you could hear like Lucille Ball being like very dramatic. And each story was like set with this kind of supernatural tone to it, and it was like, tune in tonight for a tale well calculated to keep you in suspense, and they would go bum bum. It would be brought to you by my sister, and I love the advert. Roma wines, made in California for your enjoyment throughout the land. And I loved it so much. I had like a best of collection, and then I would just buy like more and more collections as I like kept listening to them. I enjoy it. I don't really watch a lot of scary movies, but I love these kind of old timey short stories with like pretty simple gimmicks.
For a while, I got really into Welcome to Night Vale. I went to their live show and they put out a book. I'm also an auditory learner. If I go to a lecture, years later, I can almost verbatim recite back. One reason, like I love podcasts. I love listening. I listen to them all day long while I'm working. Do you think, as somebody who is steeped in the history of these radio shows, do you think there is like, our podcast, the modern version of that? Do you think this idea of like a narrative podcast will find more popular? I felt like it was popular for a hot second and then kind of faded away a little bit, but I think there is something so interesting about that art form. And I'm just wondering like what you think of even like more modern day takes on radio shows.
I absolutely agree. I love Night Vale is one of my favorite ones. It definitely has that kind of old radio vibe. It was like an eerie, weird show. It's so funny. I think I struggle to get into like narrative podcasts because I'm comparing them to these NBC radio shows from the 40s where I'm like, oh, well, the acting here is so good, and the direction and the sound stuff. And sometimes like I'll listen to an audio podcast or an audio narrative one, and I'm like, oh, it still sounds off to me. Something about the acting is like a little too actable. I don't know what it is, but I hope, I'd love to listen to more modern versions of what I've been listening to forever. I think that would be a really cool way to continue this tradition. The interesting thing about like old time radio shows is they really got killed by TV. Like once a TV was wheeled into everyone's living room, there wasn't much of a market. And some of them tried to like do the leap of being like, we'll do what we do, but on TV. And it didn't. So I'd love it if podcasts could kind of bring back that mantle because it's so fun. I also just, like you said, I'm more of an auditory learner, and I like being able to just kind of like you get a little clue of what's going on, and your mind makes up the rest of what it looks like, which I sometimes prefer TV or film.
I also love audiobooks. I've listened to a lot more than I ever used to in the past, like these past couple of years, especially. I'll listen to audiobooks while I'm out on a walk, or I'll be making dinner or cleaning the house and I have an audiobook on, and I love it, especially either when like the narrator does all of the different voices or you have different voices coming in. And I do feel like it just brings that text to life in a way. When you think about old time radio shows, what's the comparison with audiobooks?
Oh, that's a great question. That's probably why my parents got me radio shows, is because I loved reading, but I loved audiobooks more. Like I would fall asleep to a different book every night. I think the difference kind of might just be the like sound design in radio shows. I feel like audiobooks is mostly just the voices themselves without like, the little like footstep kind of things. And
someone walks into a room or someone slams a door, like you actually hear the sound effect, right, in the radio show.
Yeah. And I mean, depending on the audiobook, now that I think about it, because some like the A Series of Unfortunate Events books by Lemony Snicket.
I do. I love that whole story. I love
Yeah.
that franchise. I loved the film. I loved that whole world. What did you love especially about that audiobook?
All done by like Tim Curry. He narrated it, but he like had different voices and tones for each character, and then one for the narrator. And then like each or not episode, each book began with like an original song by Stephen Merritt, like about the book you're about to hear. And I think that was more like a very nice setting of the stage and kind of like an old timey showman kind of way. I mean, other audiobooks I've read, Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore.
Yes.
That one, I listened to the audiobook of that one on some road trip, and I was astounded by like this like simple trick where the narrator had a regular voice, but then the book within the book, he would like transition to that voice. And then there's a twist late in it. I don't want to give it all away, where those two voices kind of met. And I was like, whoa, I don't know how I would have experienced that on the page, but like audibly, it was incredible. It flew me right back old suspense episodes with Agnes Morehead, where you were like, oh no, here it comes.
There is something so suspenseful about just having the audio. Another thing I love is any kind of like celebrity memoirs. And like a lot of people are reading their own memoirs. To hear somebody's intonation or their emotional state as they're reading some part of their story, to me, it just adds a whole nother layer where you really do feel like, oh, they're talking to me, like they're sitting down next to me. I hope that kind of audio storytelling, I'm really hoping will somehow make a comeback. And I agree with you, like nobody's quite cracked it yet, like the way that there was this real fandom around these radio shows, but I absolutely think there could be.
Possibly, I think the most famous one is War of the Worlds by Orson Welles, where that was like more of the most experimental ones with the craft, because he took the short story by H.G. Wells and he turned it into like the first half is all done like as a faux radio show, like a faux news program. They have a broadcaster and an orchestra, and then they keep being like, we bring you now to Hackensack, New Jersey, where there's a report of a strange saucer flying in the air. And at the time, some people, they would have tuned in to a different program and then tuned back into CBS. So they missed maybe the intro of like, this is War of the Worlds. So they thought it was a real show. And so there was a like small panic amongst radio listeners where they actually like were running out of their house thinking like aliens were above Hackensack, New Jersey. It's an incredibly active, very well done show. So start with that one. For suspense, I would definitely check out Agnes Morehead in Sorry, Wrong Number. She's such a crazy actress. Like she gets so fully, like you were talking about, like it takes a very specific talent, to just bring it to your ears. She gives it everything for your ears. And I've seen pictures of her where she'll start in like full makeup, nice hair and glasses in the beginning of a show. And by the end of it, it's like everything, like her shoes are on the other side of the studio, because she's getting so like hysterical and so into this character of this like invalid woman who overhears on the phone a plan of someone's wife being murdered, and she's like desperately trying to figure out who it is so she could save their life, but also like try to see where her husband is. And it's like 30 minutes of like white knuckle suspense. I listen to it all the time. It's really incredible.
How does somebody find those recordings?
It's so nice to have YouTube. I think you could just type YouTube suspense Sorry, Wrong Number. It would probably pop up. There are downloads if you're like a download person on like archive.org. It's a really good resource. I'm a big completist, so right now I'm trying to listen to like every episode in broadcast order of some of these shows. And then if you want to be like a real weirdo like me, Radio Spirit still exists. You can buy their last 5 CDs that they have on sale.
I don't know, Zach. I feel like we should do something to like stage a comeback for these radio shows. I feel like there's something kind of magical.
I admire them so much for what they're doing. They're keeping me alive. live almost. Should we just hire like a car with a giant bullhorn and play some episodes?
Drive around New York City and imitating Agnes Morehead.
Yeah.
Did these radio shows, were they performed in front of a live audience?
For suspense, they were alone because it was so, dependent on like sound quality. And some episodes were written by like Ray Bradbury, which is like an incredible find. And I remember this one called like The Screaming Woman, which is terrifying. It's this like little girl who like in like an abandoned lot keeps hearing this like howling, screaming woman. And the sound is so like chaotically terrifying to me as a kid. They wouldn't record in front of the studio audience, because it would scare the hell out of them. They just hear audience members be like, "Oh God!" But also they had to like control the like the audio in different ways. But the comedies and stuff would be like the sitcom of the day. Is like, let's get some people in the seats in a vaudeville theater and we'll record our little like studio comedy or radio show comedy. And they would also do it for the movies as well. There's some very funny like audience actor interactions sometimes because it's all like live, right? It's all broadcast, and movie actors aren't used to live, so sometimes they would flub a line, and it's very funny to hear that back in the day.
I feel like Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me was also trying to tap into that a little bit,
Yeah.
right? I always felt like that felt like an old time radio show, right? Even though you knew it was obviously being filmed today, but that kind of live
Yeah.
element of you were never quite sure what was going to happen or what people were going to say.
There were a few of those like NPR ones, like A Prairie Home Companion. That felt like it was kind of like an arch old time radio show type thing of like, we know it's hokey and we're gonna kind of make fun of it, but we're also gonna do it. This great live show called the Thrilling Adventure Hour that would be incredible, like 2.5 hour live shows where each half hour was like a different spoof of a old time radio show. So you'd have like a Western or like a space adventure, or favorite was like the ghost detective show. There are some, but it very much feels like it's a niche thing, which I don't mind. I've realized in life, the things that bring me joy might not be the most popular, but they don't have to be.
It's so true. That's what I love about, and what I'm so interested in with this podcast and talking to so many different people about what brings them joy. And like specifically when you wrote to me and said, "Oh, I want to talk about old time radio shows." I'm like, "Oh my God, I never even thought about that." And I love that joy can take like all those types of forms, and it can be whatever you're into. And it doesn't have to be something that's massively popular. It doesn't have to be something that anybody even knows anything about, right? It's just these shows that sort of bring you back to your childhood, but that you rediscovered as an adult and that you continue to just have so much appreciation for, which I think is terrific. Zach, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you're also a comedian and a performer. And if somebody wanted to know more about the work that you do, how would they follow you? How would they find out about what you're doing?
They can find me on Instagram. That's where I usually am these days, at Zach Lennon-Simon, all one word. Sometimes I do storytelling shows, pandemic to willing. That's what I do mostly, storytelling and comedy shows, things like that. I used to host a pizza review show on YouTube. You'll see a Bob Ross looking guy, and that's me.
As a true pizza aficionado who would eat pizza every day of my life, if I could prevent myself from getting to be like 500 pounds doing it, I am going to go to YouTube immediately and look up your pizza review YouTube show. Great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I can't wait to listen to all of these fantastic radio shows. And I really think we have to figure out how to bring them back.
Goodness, I have all kinds of nostalgia now for this bygone era. This episode made me want to dive right into an audio-only time machine and be part of these productions. We owe a lot to them, the precursors to today's podcasts and audiobooks. If you want to get a taste of these shows that Zach loves so much, there are loads of ways to listen for free and a huge community of fans out there for them. Zach mentioned YouTube as a great option. There's a YouTube channel called Old Time Radio Shows with almost 12,000 subscribers. And on there, you'll find shows like Sherlock Holmes, The Lone Ranger, and one of Zach's favorites, Suspense. There's another one called Old Time Radio Archive. Its fan base is even bigger with over 33,000 subscribers. Suspense is big on there too. along with other classics like The Green Hornet, Gunsmoke, and Dragnet. MakeUseOf.com recently wrote an article with some other resources. I'll link to them in the show notes for this episode on KristaAbompato.com/joyproject. There you'll find links to Relic Radio, Vintage Rocket Radio, Internet Radio, Pumpkin FM, and RUSC, which stands for Are You Sitting Comfortably? In addition to having old-time radio shows, the site The Internet Archive is a nonprofit library that has literally millions of free books, movies, software, music, and websites. It's an incredible resource for any kind of media you're looking for, and you can get to it at archive.org. If audiobooks are your thing, did you know your local public library has many options that are just a few clicks away? I use two apps for public library audiobooks. One is called Libby, and the other is called Cloud Library, both completely free to use by entering your public library card number. It's a tough world out there right now, friends. We've got to take care of our well-being so we can take care of each other. So if today's world's got you down and you need to escape into a good radio drama, mystery, or comedy, we've got you covered. If you tune into any of these resources, let me know what you think. You can find me on Twitter at KristaNYC, on Instagram at KristaRoseNYC, and through the website for this podcast, KristaAvompato.com/joyproject. Thanks for spending part of your day with me. I hope it gave you a spark of joy to hear about Zach's love of old-time radio shows. A big thank you to Zach for joining us and opening up this world for me and for everybody who's listening. If you want to check out everything Zach's doing, you can find him on Instagram at Lennon-Simon and on Twitter at Zach Lennon-Simon. He made a short documentary that's on Vimeo called Frantic Delicate Summer. Again, all these links will be in the show notes for this episode at KristaAvompato.com/joyproject. I'll be back in 2 weeks on Tuesday, July 12th with another interview episode of Joy Project. And until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other. I hope you have a joy-filled week, and I'll chat with you soon.